My name is Indri Yohana. After reading about the regulation related to refugee, there were several things that caused my group to oppose the rule ratified by Indonesia regarding refugees. Because in ratifying this rule on refugees, this rule was made based on the reference of the 1951 Refugee Convention. The 1951 Refugee Convention is considered important to be ratified because the convention is the first international agreement that cover that most important aspects of the refugee's life. The convention also stipulates the minimum standard of right that will be obtained for refugees, namely to obtain the same standard of treatment that is desired by other foreign nationals in particular country and in many cases also the same treatment as local nationals. For the minimum standard, the rights obtained include 1. The right not to be forcibly repatriated or revolved to a country where the refugees have reason of fear of being persecuted. Article 33 2. The right not to be expelled except in very clear circumstances. Article 32 3. Exemption from punishment for illegal wiretapping of a state party to this convention. Article 31 4. Right to work. Article 17 5. The right to own a house. Article 21 6. The right to education. Article 22 7. The right to obtain public assistance. Article 23 8. Right to freedom of religion. Article 4 9. The right to obtain legal service. Article 16 10. Freedom of movement within the territory of the state. Article 26. And the last 11. The right to obtain an identity card. Article 27. If we look at the provisions stipulated in the 1951 Refugee Convention, there are several things that cause our group to be against this refugees related rule. Namely, in Article 17, 21, 22, and 4, which are
Article 17, which contains the right to work for a refugee, and Article 21, namely a right to have a house. The article requires state parties to the convention to provide work for a refugee, which is considered too heavy for the Indonesian government, considering that Indonesia is a developing country and has a fairly high unemployment rate. High the per capita income of the Indonesian population itself is also considered not quite feasible. In addition, in Article 21, in that article there is a provision to provide housing for a refugee, which is also considered very difficult for Indonesia government to implement. The poverty rate in Indonesia is also quite high. Besides that, there are still many underdeveloped areas in Indonesia that still need proper infrastructure from the central government. Therefore, if the government make a policy it them providing facility in the form of house for refugees, it is not appropriate and is still far away from the condition of Indonesia as a developing country. There are other provisions for several articles of the Refugee Convention which are still possible if implemented by Indonesia government. but they say provision can also create gap for the Indonesian people if implemented. The provisions are contained in Article 22 concerning the right to obtain education and Article 4, namely the right to freedom of religion.
Okay. In addition, in Article 21, in that article there is a provision to provide housing for refugees, which is also considered very difficult for the Indonesia government to implement. The poverty rate in Indonesia is also quite high. Besides that, there are still many underdeveloped areas in Indonesia that still need proper infrastructure from the central government. Therefore, if the government makes a policy in terms of providing facilities in the form of house for refugees, it is not appropriate and is still far away from the condition of Indonesia as a developing country. There are other provisions of several articles of the 1951 Refugee Convention which are still possible if implemented by the Indonesia government. But this provision can also create gaps for the Indonesia people if implemented. The provisions are contained in Article 22 concerning the right to obtain education and Article 4, namely the right to freedom of religion. In realizing the right to obtain education for refugees as regulated in Article 22, the Indonesian government can actually make this happen. However, the policy to provide education for refugees up to secondary or tertiary level is very uniquely to be implemented, considering that only a small number of Indonesia can afford education up to university. Moreover, regarding the implementation of Article 4 which relates to the right to freedom of religion for refugees, the Indonesian government can also implement this provision, but to implement the provision there are several things that need to be considered.
There's regulation problems on handling the refugees because Indonesia has not ratified the United Nations Convention on the Status of Refugees 1951 and the 1967 Refugee Protocol to the Status of Refugees. The only law that touches on the handling of foreign refugees in Indonesian national law is Law Number 37 of 1999 concerning foreign relations. We have to be aware of the negative impacts that may occur from the ideological, political, social, and cultural and security aspects. In terms of security, refugees can cause political radicalism and militancy that can spread to the surrounding community. And from a social point of view, the multiculturalism brought by refugees is seen as a threat and capable of causing social conflict. And from an economic point of view, the arrival of refugees results in competition for resources with local residents and fulfill existing infrastructure. And from an environmental point of view, problems arise when refugees depend on natural resources for their economic activities, which can cause environmental damage. And in terms of national security, it is necessary to be wary of whether any foreigner who declares himself to be a refugee is actually a foreign spy or a member of an international terrorist network who intend to spread their ideology, not to mention if the refugees carry epidemic diseases that could end up in Indonesia, while refugees also have the right to mobility and interact with local residents. Thank you.